Hey there, everyone. Welcome to an episode of Fantasy for the Ages, the show where father and son get together and talk about fantasy, science fiction, and other nerdy things that we enjoy. Just Jim here, the father of the show, bringing today another quick take episode where I'm talking about the 100 best fantasy books of all time. Maybe. If you enjoy this episode, be sure to remember to like it down below. We hope you'll subscribe to our channel. Leave us comments down below in the comment box and look in the show notes all the other ways that you can connect with us: Discord, social media, Patreon. Check them all out. So, I love when I find lists like this, rankings or collections of books from science fiction and fantasy. These especially help me discern books that should be on my TBR if I haven't ever heard of them yet. Things that might not have somehow ended up on my radar. I recently came across a Time magazine list that was published back in 2020, so just a little dated now. Not too bad, and honestly, the things on this list are mostly timeless because they didn't try to rank the books. They were looking at the best 100 fantasy books of all time, and they wanted to create a truly comprehensive list. To create this list, Time recruited a panel full of some of the best modern fantasy authors and had them work alongside Time staff members to basically think about all the books they really think hold up as the best fantasy books of all time and nominate them into the pool that would be considered. The authors they pulled together were fantastic. People such as N.K. Jemisin, Neil Gaiman, George R. Martin, Diana Gabaldon, and Cassandra Clare, and more. I mean, people who are really well known in fantasy these days, but lots of different leanings and styles. So, again, great diversity to the people considering and nominating books. Once they were all done nominating, they had about 250 books to work with. Now they took time to rate all of these, each author, each staff member, putting their rankings to these books using some rubrics they created. And then the editors took these, kind of put them into a more aggregated, average list. But they didn't just take the best numbers. The editors then looked at a number of indicators from these top books that also should be taken into account. Things like originality, critical reception, popular reception, and even books that had influence. What kind of influence did they have on the fantasy genre or just in literature in general? And finally, they came up with what they thought were the best 100 fantasy novels of all time. They did not bother trying to rank these. Instead, they simply list them chronologically, starting all the way back from the 9th century, the Arabian Nights, all the way up to the latest in the list, a 2020 YA novel by Isabel Ibanez called Woven in Midnight. Reviewing the list, I saw plenty that I've already read and was glad to see was there. Things like The Lord of the Rings, The Chronicles of Narnia, The Wheel of Time, Harry Potter, A Song of Ice and Fire, The Dragon Riders of Pern, all classics, all really impactful on the fantasy genre. There were other more classic and in many cases designed for younger readers on the list, like Alice in Wonderland and Through the Looking Glass by Lewis Carroll, Mary Poppins, A Wrinkle in Time, Redwall. Okay, things that many of us read when we were children, or at least were familiar with. Then there's the rest of the books on the list. Now, some of these, they really didn't interest me. But then there were some that I was like, yeah, I need to read that. Now, some of those weren't even on my TBR yet. I'm like, how did I miss this? How is it not there? So, as I looked at the books from this list that I definitely was kind of jazzed for, the ones that were already on my TBR, I raised them up. And the ones that weren't, now they are. One caveat to the books I'm going to mention now, because this is what I'm going to talk about for the rest of the episode. Some of the best 100 were clearly fantasy romance, particularly a number of them that were YA novels. That's typically not my thing. So while I looked at such books on this list, I gave them a look. I looked, what is this about? And if they couldn't make it past my fantasy romance gag reflex, they're not on the list. Here's my two lists. There's really not too much on them. And just like Time Magazine's list, I'm going to put them in chronological order. So here's the books that were already on my TBR, and now they're up higher. The Last Unicorn, Peter S. Beagle. Both A Wizard of Earthsea and its sequel, The Tombs of Atuan by Ursula K. Le Guin. Now, I have all four of the books of that quintet on my TBR. I raised them higher. Neverwhere by Neil Gaiman. American Gods by Neil Gaiman. I haven't read any Neil Gaiman. Fonda Lee's The Green Bones Saga, beginning with 2017's Jade City. R.F. Kuang's The Poppy War trilogy, which Zach, my son, just recently read. So all of these have been raised up higher on the list. I think the Poppy War trilogy is one I'm going to get to actually pretty soon. But there's a few books that have now been added to the TBR that weren't there before. So that starts with Good Omens, Terry Pratchett and Neil Gaiman collaboration. The four-book Dandelion Dynasty by Ken Liu, beginning with 2015's The Grace of Kings. Circe by Madeline Miller, just a standalone novel. And The Burning series by Evan Winter, starting with 2017's The Rage of Dragons. Two books are published already. Two more are anticipated but not yet out. But there's 4 spots now on my TBR. So there you go. Some TBR adjustments and the addition of basically 10 more books to the TBR. How about you? Are you familiar with these books that I've revealed today? Have you already read them? Do you plan to read them now? Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below or come chat with us on Discord. An invitation is in the show notes. Now, do you want to check out the rest of the list for yourself? Here's the web address. Just go ahead. I'll put it in the show notes too, but feel free to just freeze it and type away. All right. Thanks for watching, everyone. We'll talk to you next time.